I just believed that the scientific establishment was pretty much on the up and up, and that they would, of course, address a new claim with justice and with curiosity.
Sure, their ears would be perked.
Oh, absolutely. And they would have a new field. They always claim to be interested in new frontiers. But I found, to my great dismay, increasingly, that they were not interested in new things, really. They were interested primarily in getting rid of a new idea that quite radically upset their apple cart. The people that were most threatened by this and who acted in the most egregious negative way were my former friends at MIT in the hot fusion program. MIT gets tens of millions of dollars every year to research how to make multi-million degree, 200 million degree Kelvin temperatures to create the kind of fusion that they believe is going on in the core of the sun, and to create helium. And that would indeed be an infinite supply of energy from water, because the fuels are in water.
Sure.
But they haven't succeeded, and they've spent, in the United States alone, an estimated $20 billion, not million, $20 billion since the early 1950s.
And they're still going at it?
Still going at it, and when Pons and Fleischmann came out with that astounding announcement 12 hours before the Exxon Valdez ran aground, most ironically, they were shocked. Now, they didn't believe it, and they immediately assembled all reasons to doubt it. First, from a theoretical point of view, and then they began to bring up all kinds of bogus, and in some cases, quite bluntly, fraudulent reasons against Pons and Fleischmann for throwing the whole thing into the trash can. The U.S. Department of Energy made a rush to judgment. Within 6 months, they had a negative report, and that stamp of disapproval has lasted since then.
Well, when this started, and what year was that for Fleischmann?
1989,
all right.
March 23rd, 1989, in the afternoon in Salt Lake City, this astounding announcement came from two world-class chemists.
Whatever happened to them?
Well,
they still alive?
Absolutely. Dr. Fleischmann, in particular, a fellow of the Royal Society, one of the world's most famous electrochemists, a brilliant man, and it was his driving force that brought the idea initially to the fore. He worked with Dr. Stanley Pons, then an American, who was the head of the chemistry department of the University of Utah. They're both alive. Dr. Fleischmann, as I said, attends regularly all the international meetings. He participates in the Italian program. There's a small official Italian program in this area, just several $1 million a year, and it's kind of mislabeled. It's not given the cold fusion or low energy nuclear reactions name, but it's there nonetheless. And Stanley Pons, I regret to say, changed his citizenship, but I do understand his feelings. Early in the 90s, he was sick and tired of being called a fraud. So he moved to France with Dr. Fleischmann and worked under Japanese auspices. Toyota, Minoru Toyota, the late one of the founders of Toyota, funded them in a laboratory in the south of France, in Nice, for many years. And they had great success, and their work was even published in peer-reviewed journal, Physics Letters A, in 1993. And still, that had no effect. Getting back to our original issue here, the academic government complex, not the military-industrial complex, as much as the academic government complex, is against new scientific ideas that threaten the foundations of their work. And they, no matter how many papers are published, I don't care whether they're on the internet or not on the internet or where they are, the establishment, academic, government complex is brain dead.
I mean, why can't they open their arms and say, this is exciting, let's try it, let's experiment, and let's jump in it?
Well, it's remarkable. I must tell you, George, 15 years, almost 15 years now, after that fateful day of March 23rd, 1989, I continue to evolve in my understanding of the well, the emotional and psychological and intellectual armoring, to borrow a term from the famous Wilhelm Reich, that scientists have. It's astounding. One physicist at MIT, whose name is Dr. Hermann Feshbach, one of the world's foremost nuclear physics people. Now he's deceased. But at MIT, as I was finishing up my time there as a senior person in the MIT news office as a science journalist, he had played a role in getting rid of a major article that was of mine that was going to appear in the MIT magazine, very influential magazine called Technology Review. It's on newsstands all over the place. He said to me, "I've had 50 years of experience in nuclear physics, and I know what's possible and what's not possible." And then that was it. That was his total statement, which I would cite forever as a statement, a kind of statement that should never come out of the mouth of any person who considers themselves a legitimate scientist. They're not a scientist if they say, based on previous knowledge and theory that I have, I know for all time what is possible and what's not. That's obviously crazy.
I know you had just mentioned, by the way, Dr. Wilhelm Reich, who's now deceased as well.
Absolutely.
And didn't he come up with a theory of what he called orgone?
Absolutely, orgone, right.
And they put him in jail over this, right?
Yes, it's a complicated story as to how he arrived in prison. He lived, by the way, for those who don't really know much about Reich and who may think Reich was a completely deluded person. I didn't know much about him myself, quite frankly, until about the year 2000, long after my entry into the cold fusion field. He would live between 1897 and 1957. He was a close colleague of Sigmund Freud. He was an assimilated Jewish person from Austria. He left Germany, obviously, early on and worked in Denmark and Norway.
He was a psychiatrist first,
He was a psychiatrist. He had many ideas of sexuality, some of which today are quite commonly accepted, actually, but in many circles today. You so to speak, maybe a modern forerunner of the, generally speaking, more sexually liberal ideas that many people today may have.
He was the early version of the Masters and Johnson.
Perhaps, you might say. But how he got involved in a more physics-based and biology-based study of nature is quite one of the most amazing stories that one could ever imagine. But his work has been taken up by others, and we'll have time to talk about that.
Yeah.
But why did he get in jail? In 1957, he was put in jail for contempt of court. And this originated from his statement that he would not allow any court to be the adjudicator of a scientific issue, which in general terms I agree with.
Sure.
In other words, what the hell is a court doing to determine a major scientific question? Well, at that time, he and other physicians in a network were studying the effects of so-called orgone accumulators, these little chambers that one could get into of a special design, and he was determining the physiological effect on various maladies, was not selling it as a cancer cure, but some left-winger went after him and called sick the FDA on him, actually.
And they put him in jail over that.
Put him in jail, and he died in prison.
And took all his equipment, and nobody ever found it again. Right?
They did not take his equipment, actually. They burned his books. He was the only scientist in history, I believe, who had his books burned in Nazi Germany, Soviet Union, and the United States. There was a court order, believe it or not, in the United States. It's hard to conceive of this, but there was, to burn and get rid of certain books that he had written with the word orgone in it.
All right, we'll come right back because I want to really talk with you now about these other alternative forms of energy that you're talking about, Eugene, and just see how close we are to implementing some of this, or if we ever will be. And also, I'm going to ask you about peaking oil, because that's something that has kind of piqued my interest, and I want you to see if you can explain to us what that means, peaking oil. Back in a moment.